I'm Ben. I'm going to be talking about air layering today. So I'll just talk about propagation first. Basically being the idea like, what are ways we can reproduce trees? That's essentially what propagation is. Air layering, which we're going to talk about today, is a type of clonal propagation. The advantage of that being if there's a specific variety of a tree that we like. So let's say a variety of mango, or mango's maybe not a great example of air layering, but at least a citrus or guava or something like that that we really like. It's a way for us to clonally propagate it. The advantage is it's less aggressive maybe than doing cuttings. So it's a lot of things. There's a pretty low range of things you can do cuttings on successfully. A lot of times you have to use rooting hormone or misting. With air layering, it's kind of like a gentle way of vegetative propagation. So advantages being you're clonally propagating it, so it's exactly like the mother tree you're taking it from. So let's say we have a Hayden mango, we can reproduce that mango and have another Hayden mango that we plant in the ground at the end of this whole process. It's a whole other topic, but if you plant the seed, you're not going to get that. So if you take the seed from a Hayden mango, that seed is the baby of that tree, and that tree you took it from is the mother. So it's the sexual offspring of two trees generally. It can be, even if it's self-pollinating, it's still a sexual offspring. And so it's going to have its genetics are going to be different from the mother tree. It's going to share traits, but it's going to be different in some ways. So if I plant that Hayden seed, the tree that grows up, it'll probably have characteristics and traits that are different from the mother tree, the Hayden. So maybe it's more sour, maybe it's more fibrous, maybe the seed's bigger, whatever. So that's an advantage to air layering. Disadvantages are going to be root system. So what we're going to do is going to create a root system, but it's not going to have a taproot. And that's really important to note. Claire probably wants to be able to see, but it doesn't have a taproot. And the reason that's important is because taproots are kind of like an anchor for a tree. When a tree has a taproot, that taproot goes way down in the ground and it helps to stabilize it. When a tree doesn't have a taproot, if you get like a good strong wind or something, it's a lot more likely to topple over. So if you're going to do air layering, some species are really bad at actually creating a very strong root system. Others are a little bit better, but trees that are air layered, it's better to have them in like a more sheltered area. I knew in Florida a lot of orchardists who would air layer like longan and lychee, and they would, if a good strong storm came through, it knocked big trees down. So citrus is kind of a nice one for that, because a lot of citruses kind of stay pretty small, so they're less likely to uproot and fall over. It's a lot easier to guard. So I'll just talk about the process.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So even the mature, so like if you take, if you're propagating from the parent tree, and I imagine it's not stable for a while, but eventually does it develop that taproot and it becomes as strong?
No, you only get a taproot from a seed.
Okay.
So the big advantage with grafting, one of the big advantages with grafting, is because you're planting a seed that's going to be the rootstock. You get the advantage of a taproot.
Got it. Okay.
And then you're surgically attaching, a bud or a branch tip or whatever to the top of that rootstock.
Okay.
So you get the advantage of a taproot and a strong root system, with the advantage of also having a clonally propagated tree.
Thank you.
So, the other advantage of air layering is you do generally tend to get fruit faster. So basically the branch still kind of thinks it's a branch. At least that's what I've been told. I don't know who asked the branch that, but generally trees that are propagated by air layering are going to fruit faster than trees planted from seed. So that's another advantage. So faster fruit, a clone of the parent tree, which is really important in any sort of commercial system because you want consistency. So yeah, So I might use this stick actually as an example. So it's kind of important to understand some basic plant anatomy when we're doing this. A really basic, kind of simple way of putting it is that the bark of the tree is kind of like it's referred to as the phloem. It's where sugars are transmitted throughout the plant. So the leaves produce sugars through photosynthesis, and then through the bark, it's transferred to different parts of the tree, to younger branches that are growing, or to the roots to store during a dormant period, those kinds of things. And then generally in the woody part, beneath the bark, which is the phloem, it's referred to as a xylem, and that generally transfers water and minerals, okay? And that goes from the roots, where the water and the minerals are, to the tips of the branches. So they're generally kind of going, generally speaking, they're going in opposing directions. So there are some what's the word I'm looking for? Exceptions to that, thank you. But for the most part, they're kind of going opposite. So what we're going to do today when we're air layering is we're going to find branches, and I generally try to do something like minimally a pinky thick. That's kind of my rule of thumb, rule of pinky, if you will. Like another finger size is probably pretty good. Like I was mentioning earlier, I've seen people do like huge branches successfully, but I think a good place to start is something finger thickness. And what we're gonna do is we'll have a branch. This is actually a pretty good thickness right here to demonstrate. And we're gonna pick a strip. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take we're gonna grab the knife. We're gonna take the knife, and you want like a decent sized branch on the end of that. You don't want something massive, but you want something, you know, I don't know. You have to think of the fact that you're gonna be planting this into a pot later. So once we cut it off the tree, we're gonna plant it into a pot. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this branch, and we're gonna make a score mark around it, and I'll pick another spot. Let's do like, I don't know, off the top of my mind, I don't remember like good rule of thumbs for this, but I'd say good like 3 inches. It's probably good.
How deep are you cutting?
Not very deep, because we just want to cut through the bark. We're not trying to cut into the wood, we're just trying to cut through the bark. So, and then we're gonna peel that bark off. Some of these knives are really good for this because they've got little pieces that are attachments that help us to shift into that bark. Another example is this one. These are budding knives. So that's also kind of nice. So I can get that under the bark to help me peel it away.
Yeah, because if it's alive, it will be a little harder to peel, won't it? Or
It
not?
depends. Sometimes a year, like if a tree is, we call it, if the bark is slipping, it's basically when the tree is undergoing growth. It's actually very easy to peel bark.
Okay.
So you don't have to air layer when it's slipping, but generally a good time of year to do this would be, if you're doing a fruit tree, would be right after it's fruited, right before it's about to shoot new growth. That's kind of the same time of year you do pruning. At least that's my understanding, because one, you don't want to disrupt. You don't want to air layer a branch that's got fruit on it, or that's going to fruit.
Okay.
You want a branch that's free of fruit. It's already fruited.
Okay.
If it's going to shoot new growth, that means it's gaining vigor and energy to get ready to do growth, and in that sense, I think it'll also have energy to put out roots. But essentially, you can see here I've cut out a strip of bark. It goes all the way around. If you did this to a tree normally,
You kill it.
yeah, it's called girdling. So it'll still get, what's important is it'll still, for the most part, get water and minerals from the tree, but sugars can't go back. There are actually, I'm not aware of anybody who does this, but I've read that people will actually do this intentionally to force a branch to produce its fruit and ripen quickly. Or I'm not fully understand the advantages to that, because I don't know anybody who actually does it. But I've read that people will do that with a purpose. And then the other benefit is that, yeah, in some cases it kills the tree, and that can actually be to your advantage. So I know in some like cultures in the tropics, for instance, an easy way to kill a tree and help take it out actually is to strip the bark around the base and girdle it, and that'll kill the tree. And I guess in those cases sometimes it's easier to knock it down. I've seen them do that in Papua. So
Ben,
that being said,
would you want the bark that's brown or green?
you're saying strip away the bark that's brown or green, or you want the bark to be?
Are you finding a place where the bark is brown or green?
Yeah, I'd go brown. So you want more mature.
Thank you.
Green, you may not even be able to peel because it has to have gone through secondary. That's kind of another topic, but there's primary growth and there's secondary growth. Secondary growth is when it really starts to develop that bark and differentiate a little bit.
Thank you.
So I would, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but generally I would go for something with brown bark. It's going to slip a lot easier. And generally, you know, a branch this big isn't going to have green bark anyways, most likely. Maybe on some mangoes and stuff, some real vigorous growth might, but for the most part, it's probably not going to be this thick. So once we've exposed that piece, what we're going to do to keep the plant from dying, essentially, is we're going to take a piece of plastic. You can do this with other things too. It just needs to be impermeable to air. The reason being that we're going to add a wet media to it, and we don't want that media to dry out. So if this was breathable, that'd be an issue because over time the sun could, you know, evaporate all the water out of it, and then the roots are going to dry out and desiccate and die. So another thing that I know people use outside of plastic, this is what I saw in Indonesia a lot, was just plastic. I think generally it's probably good not to use clear plastic because the sun can really cook them. But I've seen people do clear plastic if it's in like a shaded area. But the other thing that we did in Florida is we used tin foil or aluminum foil. So that's kind of an easy thing. You don't need anything to tie off the ends if you've got that, because you can kind of just crimp it into place. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to put a wet media in here, and we're going to wrap it around the wound. Okay, this is a very large example, but we're going to wrap it around the wound, and if it's plastic like this, we're going to have to tie the ends. Okay, the media needs to be damp, like I was just kind of saying. And what this basically does is this branch will continue to get water and minerals from the mother tree, so it's kind of getting nursed. But we've kind of freaked it out and put on like a survival response in it. And so with that media there, it's going to root out. So let's pretend this is where the branch comes out. Or this is where it attaches to the tree, and this is where the branch ends.
Okay.
On this side, it's going to root out. So within the bark they're basically stem cells. They're cells that don't have a purpose. They can differentiate into different things, and one thing they can turn into is roots. So you can't do this with every tree. It's really important to. You can try it with any tree, but there are certain species that are more prone to actually. That are better for this type of propagation. And the book that I like to look at that was really recommended by Echo is Fruits of Warm Climates by Julia Morton. And there's a free copy online. So if you type in Fruits of Warm Climates, it's free. I think it's through Purdue maybe. They have a free copy online. But they go through a lot of trees in the tropics specifically. Julia Morton does in that book. And she goes through propagation techniques for all those trees, and she'll state if air layering is an option. Something else to know is that book is a little outdated. I don't know if there's newer editions, but my understanding is it was published in the 80s. So there are some things in there that she'll say like you can't do this, but I think you actually can. For the most part, anything she says you can do, that's totally doable. But there's a few instances where she's like, people have tried doing this and they've been unsuccessful. But I think since then there have been people who have been successful. So take it with a grain of salt. But everything that she says you can do, you can for sure do. So yeah, by covering it up with media and the plastic, it'll root out into that media.
You can take the bark around all the way around, right?
Yes, it's all the way around. I haven't done that. Sorry, I should be showing you this side. But yeah, the bark is going to be taken away all the way around. We'll wrap it in the media with an impermeable material on the outside. I've got rubber bands too, and then we've got twine, which we'll use to tie the ends. It'll kind of look like a big Tootsie Roll, and then or like a party popper or something. and then we'll just leave it there. I was always told 4 or 5 months is a good amount of time. I think today what we'll do is actually do one with clear plastic, and then we can actually watch it, and that can function as an indicator too, as far as, you know, how far along it is. Once it's full of healthy new white roots, what we'll do, you know, hopefully after 4 or 5 months, what we'll do is we'll cut off that branch from the tree below the air layering point. We'll unwrap the root ball that's grown, and we'll most likely plant it into a pot. So we have to nurse it a little bit when it's cut off from the mother tree. So it has a little bit of recovery time, and then once it's rooted out more and it's recovered from that, we can then transplant it into the ground. But I know you can also transplant into the ground, you just have to baby it a little bit, and it's easier to baby it if it's in a pot. So, yeah, and then that tree will grow, it'll produce fruit a lot sooner than, some trees will produce fruit the first year. You have to be careful with that because a lot of times you don't want it to do that. It can cause the tree to crash, so, or even break. You know, if you got avocados, I don't think air layer very well, but let's pretend you had an avocado tree like this big, and it had avocados growing this big off of it. You could see how that could be an issue for that little branch. So I know we have a lot of trees that we graft that would do that would fruit like the first year, and you're just like, don't do this to yourself. So we just pinch all those fruit off. So just show some restraint, and first couple years just let it grow up a little bit before you let it fruit. Unless the fruit is really small. If you got something that produces, you know, a little tiny fruit, then it's probably okay to let it fruit early on. So.
So this is where the roots are going to come out at this end of it, right?
Yes. So hopefully I got it. I think it's about here, the cut. So I just got to get it above that cut.
Can you tie that too tight, or you really want to get it pretty snug?
I want to get it pretty snug because I don't want it to reopen. I imagine there might be a tying it too tight, but you don't really want this branch growing all that much while you're doing this. So, okay, I need another. Oh, good. Thank you.
Asking you, shower seed.
But you don't want the moisture to escape, right?
Yeah, that's the point. And yeah, it'd be an issue if that's one way you can accidentally girdle a tree in normal conditions, is by tying something tight around it, and as it grows, it'll actually girdle itself because it'll.
The barbed wire fences with that.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's good.
You want to work another one down the center? It just swallowed it. I had a hook.
Sure.